Yo, hey everyone, this is LRG. Today I'm going to be reacting on a video from one of my favorite channels on YouTube, City Beautiful. It's titled, Why Don't More US Cities Have Metro Systems Like New York? Now, if you know me, you know that I am originally from Philadelphia, so I have greatly benefited from the metro system. Uh, I lived in the west side of Philadelphia, and so whenever I wanted to get to Center City or get to the university that I worked at, I would normally take uh, the subway or the trolley. So the subway in Philadelphia kind of looks like the one that you see here in the photo behind the host, and it's actually quite convenient, right? It's akin to the ones that they have in New York, but New York has many subway rails, right? And they have a lot more lines than Philadelphia. I don't know if New York has street rails, but they have lots of subways. Certainly, the rails there are much more expensive than they are anywhere else in the United States. Um, and probably like Philadelphia, DC, Boston are up next. So I don't really react to this video from City Beautiful, and um, my chat's not up, but it probably should be. So yeah, let me know how you're feeling about all this in the chat. Let's jump into the video.
The subway was my favorite part about living in New York. The New York subway has more stations than any other metro system in the entire world, which means that you could go underground and pop up just about anywhere in the city. I didn't have to own a car while I lived in New York. It was great. When I moved away, I couldn't help but wondering,
why
do so few US cities have metro systems like
this is exactly what I love about
New York. 12 cities have metros.
This is exactly what I loved about being in New York and Philly. So when I lived in Philly, I would often visit New York just by taking the hour and a half megabus or bulk bus. And it was great because I never really needed a car to get between those two cities. I could afford to visit New York very often without the need for having to pay extravagant New York costs. But as you can see, these are some of the cities that maybe have subways, as City Beautiful is showing now.
Though only 8 have more than one line. Why do...
So as I mentioned, Philly is certainly one of those cities, right? It's certainly quite convenient to get between the 4 cities on the East Coast. So Washington, Philly, New York, Boston. They also have Amtrak that runs through them, as I talked about in my in one of the first videos on my channel. LA, I don't know much about the California rails, but I'm certain the ones here on the East Coast are certainly more functional, and they serve a lot more people. I would say if you ever wanted like the true city feel, like of living anywhere around here, I would certainly live on the in the northeastern United States. I'm hoping I can even make a return there in the future.
Why do some really big cities like Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, San Antonio, and San Diego not have one, while a smaller city like Cleveland does have one? 22 Chinese cities have built new metro systems since 2004, when the last U.S. city built a new metro system. Why don't we build one?
So if you're just watching this for the first time, or rather if you're just watching my channel for the first time, I actually reacted to a video on this not too long ago, where we looked at another video from City Beautiful on the potential high-speed rail that's going to be built starting from Dallas with a midpoint near Austin, running through Austin, and then coming to Houston, right? And I guess it seems like San Antonio would have a lot of really good promise for having a line built through it as well.
Well, it's not as if U.S. cities aren't building new mass transit, though not at the pace of European or Asian cities.
So this is the street rail. Philly has many of these, right? So in Philly, west side beyond 40th Street, you are on the street, and then once you get to 40th Street station, you go underground until you get to Center City. But outside of that, Philly has the Market Frankfurt and the Broad Street lines.
For types of mass transit systems to invest in, most cities of a certain size have a local bus network, perhaps with frequency.
Anyone else there love like that New York City feel? Like, I don't know, it's just so lovely to be in New York. I miss this so much, being on the West Coast. Like, the feel of just being able to drive like through this is madness, but walking through this is heavenly. You get to embrace the smells, the people, The food. My favorite part about New York are the bodegas, right? And I love um, Flatbush. It's in Brooklyn. Uh, Huge Caribbean culture there. I'm from the Caribbean, so it makes sense that I would love that.
Service lines that operate at frequencies of 10 minutes or better between buses. Commuter rail takes commuters from far-flung suburbs into central cities. More commonly, cities will invest in either bus rapid transit or light rail systems for their high-capacity transit needs. Dozens of cities have light rail or BRT systems, and there are hundreds of projects planned or under construction. In contrast, only about 10 metro system expansions are planned or under construction. So why are cities choosing light rail and bus rapid transit systems over metro systems? Let's get the obvious reason out of the way first. Light rail and bus rapid transit systems.
He's gonna do that bell ring thing, just letting you know. I don't know if anyone cares about that. Like, if you watch City Beautiful, he's gonna say, "We're gonna talk about this after the bell ring." Beep, beep. But seriously, it's probably due to expenses. As you can imagine, America is mainly dominated by public transportation in the form of cars and highways. So, I'm kind of skeptical on if America could ever reach a point where connectivity in the form of rails that run across the country ever become a thing. I mean, the airlines, are profiting quite heavily on people being able to travel via planes. So I don't know. It's interesting.
These cost significantly less per mile than metro systems do.
I promise, if you're watching, we're gonna get to the cow videos after this.
Light rail lines can be built for as low as $43 million per line, like the one in Norfolk, Virginia, or as expensive as $204 million per line, like a line in Portland, Oregon. That may seem like a lot of money, but the highest per mile cost for light rail is still cheaper.
So I visited Portland. The Max line is interesting. So when you get to the airport, you maybe want to take this from the airport to the city center. And there's not really like a payment method per se. What you do is you validate your ticket. And then you pay, and then you get on, and then it's just assumed that you paid. And I think, due to COVID, due to the pandemic, they haven't been checking to see if you're validated or not. So there's not really much that like they can do on that end. So as a result, a lot of people just end up riding for free.
Even the lowest per mile cost for metros. The price tag for metros can start at about $250 to $270 million per mile, like recent extensions to the San Francisco BART system. The most notorious price per mile has to be the 2nd Avenue subway in New York City, which clocked in at $2.1 billion per mile. Of course, the cost may have been worth it.
Oh, the queue! Oh my God, the queue! The queue is the queue gets really crowded. So in New York, they have like the actual commuter rails, like the ones that most New York take, like most New Yorkers take, and then they have the one that's mainly like you can tell it's very clean. It's more spacious. It's for those that are tourists that are coming in. I'm not a commuter. This is just things that I've heard from my New York friends.
It should ease congestion on the parallel Lexington Avenue line.
I have many stories on being in New York, being on this, being on these lines, like in the mornings and the afternoons. So when I first went to New York, I visited, so I stayed in Brooklyn, but I was mainly, doing the touristy things, going to Staten Island Ferry, seeing some of the embassies, the World Trade Center, Wall Street, things like that. Times Square, of course. Some of these trains are absolutely brutal. Like they get super crowded. They can sometimes smell a bit, but when you're a New Yorker, you're kind of immune to a lot of these things that are going on. So you're just stagnant. You're just trying to avoid, making that eye contact. But like New Yorkers can be, they can be very helpful, especially if things are getting competition with other people. That's when usually get in. That's kind of like one thing with East Coasters. Like we may come off as a bit brash, but it's not necessarily the case.
There's more passengers than the entire Washington metro system. Okay, so clearly metros are more expensive than light rail or bus rapid transit networks. But sometimes doesn't it make sense to spend a little bit of extra money? Metros can operate at the highest capacities, moving more people than any other mode. They accomplish this by being separated from traffic, either above ground or below ground. This separation means they can run trains closer together and achieve headways as low as 3 minutes between trains. All of that capacity only makes sense if cities have enough people to warrant it. particularly people living in dense areas around metro stops. Density is a key prerequisite for metros, or really any mass transit. A common rule of thumb is that neighborhoods with at least 7 dwelling units per acre can support a bus route. Neighborhoods at or above 30 people per gross acre can support light rail, and neighborhoods at about 45 people per gross acre can support metros. These aren't hard and fast numbers. There are other factors.
That's interesting. I actually didn't know that they considered, certain types of public transportation based on the population density within a certain acre. It's interesting.
Like context and connections to other modes that could make or break a new metro line. Unfortunately, many U.S. cities don't have enough areas dense enough to warrant a metro system. Density is certainly important, but so is total population. One study I found tried to figure out how big a city should be before contemplating building a metro system. The authors concluded that a population of about 5 million people was a good benchmark. Only 12 U.S. metropolitan areas have a population over 5 million. Of those, 9 already have metro systems. Only Dallas, Houston, and Detroit do not.
Well, if you check out the other video on my channel, I reacted to another City Beautiful on potential high-speed rail between Dallas and Houston. So definitely check that out. I mentioned it's interesting that these larger Texas cities do not have rail. Although this video is kind of old. This list has changed. Bay Area, this is really San Jose. Detroit. She said this is the largest, right?
First concluded that a population of about 5 million people was a good benchmark. Only 12 U.S. metropolitan areas have a population over 5 million.
Metro. I feel like even metro, this is kind of outdated, right? Like the largest cities in the U.S., what are they? They're New York, L.A., Chicago. I think it's San Jose, San Diego. San Antonio is definitely close. I don't know off the top of my head. Dallas is there. Houston is there. Phoenix is there now, right? So Phoenix isn't even in this list. There's actually more cities on the list that have metros above 5 million that do not have metro systems in the sense of like probably rail.
Of those, 9 already have metro systems. Only Dallas, Houston, and Detroit do not. It's probably not a coincidence that all of these are well known for their love of the automobile. So there you have it. Cities need to be big and dense to justify the high capacity a transit system like this provides. And cities need to be big and dense to justify the cost as well. While researching this video, I did pick up on another reason why some cities have metros and some cities don't. I think it's really interesting. If you look at when most U.S. metro systems were built, you'll notice that most were built in 2 clusters. Chicago, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia built theirs at the turn of the last century. Then there's a second rough cluster in the 1970s and 1980s, when the Bay Area, Washington, Atlanta, Baltimore, and Miami built theirs. Why are there 2 groups like this? The first group was clearly a product of the rapid urbanization that occurred in America's largest cities in the late 1800s. New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia had over 1 million residents each at that time.
Could you imagine being in New York at this time? Barely any, cars moving through. It looks like downtown.
Time before the automobile, so most residents had to live close enough to walk. Upper-class residents could afford to commute into the city via steam locomotive, but crowding was intense. Thus, these early cities had the right combination of population and density when the new technology of electrified subways was invented in 1890. Now, I have to admit, I haven't found a completely different...
That's really interesting. Look at this. Wow. Could you imagine being in a subway and it's just like there's no cover or anything? It's just you're just on like some open track. There's nothing covering you. Things have really changed.
Answer to why so many metro systems were built in the 1970s and 1980s. The best I could come up with was that local officials planned many of these systems in the 1950s and 1960s, when the nation was caught up in a massive post-war infrastructure boom. The federal government provided metropolitan regions with huge sums of money for highway construction. And it seems that they also provided some money for mass transit systems. Since the last metro building boom at the turn of the last century, many cities had grown to populations that warranted a metro system, like Atlanta and Washington, D.C. These cities took advantage of federal, state, and local funding to pay for these expensive systems, at a time when government and the public at large saw the need and wanted to pay. Some cities, like Seattle, almost built a metro system during this time period. Elected officials secured $900 million from the the federal government to build the system. Local voters just needed to approve the additional local funding, but decided against it. The federal money earmarked for Seattle's metro went to fund Atlanta's instead. Interesting, right? So in addition to cost, population, and housing, it seems like cities need to take advantage of a new technological innovation or a favorable government funding environment. So when are we going to see a new metro system in the United States? There are extensions to existing lines planned or under construction, but no concrete plans for a new system. It's a shame. I want to be able to ride the rails like I did in New York, but in every major U.S. city.
What do you guys think about that? I mean, I don't think it's a reality. Plus, it's going to be hard to tell how shifts in. It's going to be hard to tell how shifts in population will change. Like for example, Phoenix is quickly going, and there was no mention of Phoenix in this video at all. But I think Phoenix is larger than Philadelphia now. Isn't that crazy? In any case, hey guys, let me know what you think about it in the comments. Let's continue to discuss about it. Feel free to join the Discord, follow me on Twitch, subscribe to YouTube.